Every camp has a theme song that requires you sing along. The more we keep on drinking, the better we'll start singing. If you like to drink, wanna learn to fix your sink,
Seems like a functional thing.
wanna earn some badges, and unite with other badges. Let's make a place that we belong and sing the campfire hoo-ha song. We're gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Yeah! Gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Yeah! We're gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Yeah! Gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Who are you are? You want the fun that camp brings,
I do.
but you really fucking hate camping.
I do.
Can make a craft or have a beer.
Craft beer.
You'll learn some useful shit here. That's what I hear anyway. Let's make a place that we belong and join the campfire hoo-ha song. We're gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Yeah! We're gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Yeah! We're gonna camp hoo-ha, me, hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Gonna camp hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Hoo-ha, 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 hoo-ha.
That's 2 minutes, you were right. That's funny.
Hello, campers. Welcome to our first Camp Hoo-Ha Campfire story, which I am super excited about. For those of you that are new to camp, I think I see some newbies in the Facebook feed. Welcome to your first event. If this is in fact, the quick and dirty Coles notes of what Camp Hoo-Ha is. My name is Mel McKay, and I am your Hi Hoo-Ha. I am the leader of this thing, and it's kind of like Girl Guides for adult women, just with booze. So we typically meet in person. We're in 12 cities normally, getting together and having events, earning badges, learning new skills, meeting new friends, hugging, touching, squeezing, all of that stuff that we loved doing before COVID. And then since March, we've been coming together in a new format and making it work and riding this storm out and waiting until the day we can start to do things the old-fashioned way, which we love to do. So badges and booze, that's what we do. So welcome to all you new campers, and welcome back to you regular campers. We got no badges tonight, but we have a great story, main story. We have another little side story that we're going to tell at the very beginning. I got no J9 and Carla tonight. We're giving those two the night off. We have Rob producing our event tonight, so we've got Rob at the helm. So I'm really excited about this one. In the last month or two, we've been cleaning up our Facebook group just a little bit. Things got a little out of control in the summer. So we've been sharing a lot more empowering content and sharing a lot of really amazing stories about brave women who are doing cool things. And they've been really popular, and I thought it was time to maybe formalize some of those stories and share them together and hear them from other interesting women who can bring them to life. So I am obsessed with Vivian Maier, obsessed. The first time I ever heard about her or saw anything from her was 2013, and I think that's when the documentary came out. And I saw a photo that she had taken. I think it was a selfie of herself that she had taken in a window or a mirror, and I just was so consumed with the photo. I thought I need to find out who's on the other side of that camera. And then I watched the documentary, and I just was really compelled and intrigued and excited by who she was. And you're going to hear all about her, but I loved it because it's a story really about how women, have a lot more to them than what they present to the world. And that's Vivian Maier's story. The world thought she was one thing, And it wasn't until her life was over that they discovered that she was somebody totally different and a genius and had many interesting layers to her that are really fun to uncover. So my obsession with Vivian Maier has grown exponentially. And I got really excited in the winter. I found out that the Glenbow Museum was going to actually be doing an exhibit of her work. And I'm friends with Jenny Conway Fisher, who's the marketing director at the Glenbow. So I quickly got into her inbox and said, Jenny, we need to do a hoo-ha tour of Vivian's work. And we teed that up, and then we teed that up for early March, which we all know what happened in March. So 20 of us got into the Glenbow, got the Vivian Maier tour, and then sadly everything shut down, and not a lot of Calgarians had the chance to see the exhibit, to hear her story. So that was really heartbreaking for me. So here we are now in COVID land, where we have the opportunity to bring Vivian and her story to us. So we're gonna do that, but before we do that, I wanna share a bit of a personal story that I've also been obsessed with for my entire life. And my cousin Lindsay is gonna join us because she is just as intrigued and immersed in this family story as I am. So it is about, we have a great Auntie Val. She was a dancer in Saskatoon in the 30s. And when she was just 21 years old, she went out on a journey on her own and took a bus across Canada. And she was really chasing after her dream, which was to become a professional dancer. So growing up, us girls heard all about our great Aunt Val. And we're lucky enough to have a bunch of letters that she had written home during her adventure. And I just finished reading the story, her letters again, for probably the second or third time today. So I'm feeling really emotional about this story, but we got a picture of our great Aunt Val that Rob's gonna pull up, and I'm gonna get Lindsay to tell the first part of the story, and I'm gonna jump in, and then after that, we're gonna hand it over to Jenny, and we're gonna learn all about Vivian Maier. So go ahead, Linz.
All right, thanks for having me, Hoo-Ha. So nice to be here. Born July 26, 1915 on a farm near Harris, Saskatchewan, Canada. Saskatchewan, whoop whoop. Valerie Maud Angel was one of 6 children. So she had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, and they didn't have much, but they were a super close family. She was a petite young woman with freckles who had a magnetic personality, and her mother described her as a lovely little thing, supple, graceful as a deer, beautifully made and curved with legs for days. All she wanted to do was dance and enjoy life to the full, which she did until the end came. So Valerie started taking dancing lessons at about 11. And this would have been a big deal for their family because they didn't have much. So there was already a great deal on her shoulders. So by the time she was 20, she made a name for herself dancing in Saskatoon and throughout Saskatchewan. She did solo tap dancing, which I think is phenomenal for a prairie girl, and ballroom, along with her then dance partner, Jack. Engagements came their way as far as a small prairie town could find engagements. They danced at the Country Golf Club, and I'm sure at lots of parties, but the opening of the Bessborough Hotel would have been the grandest job that she had received to date. And her big dream was of becoming a dancer. So in 1936, at the age of 21, in the middle of the Great Depression, or the Dirty 30s as they called them, she had no money and just a receipt book to sell magazine subscriptions, and she ventured forth in pursuit of her dream. I have one entry from the first day. She's leaving July 10th on 1932, and she says, leaving home at about 7 a.m., accompanied by Evelyn Brown. We took a streetcar 2 miles east of the city limits. 2 steps off the streetcar, we start singing, march, march, march along the highway. Ev's pack is huge, and she has to be a contortionist to carry it. Another 2 steps, and along comes a car. He stops. In we get, and we get to ride in a car with a radio, clock, and everything. His name is McTavish, and he takes us all the way to Regina. He also bought us Cokes. From there, Valerie goes to Winnipeg, Whitemouth, Hawk Lake, Kenora, Port Arthur, and in Ontario, she's waiting to get a ride to Montreal with a Captain Lawrence on the Red Cloud. This is July 22nd. Good news! Got up at 7:30 and went down to the docks, walked over to pool elevators and to the one Dad has in his pictures, pool terminal number 7. There is a boat taking in grain. It's hard to see for dust. I ask for the captain and explain everything to him and talk to him for quite a long while. It's not such a terribly large boat, I found out later. Although I thought it huge, there is a crew of 15 men, 2 cooks, and the captain, who has a daughter my own age. He was swell. He gave me a big dinner. Guess he thought I was hungry and said he would take me across. He sails Sunday or Monday. Was I thrilled? I am going to wait on tables, I guess, and he's going right through to Montreal. After that, I am floating on air. So, Valerie waits in Port Arthur, and she waits, and she waits, and she's not able to get that ride. She finds a new dance partner, one Larry Gillespie. He's an experienced train hopper, and they carry on, hopping freight cars. Oh, they go through North Bay, Ottawa, Montreal, and they arrive there on September 3rd. Now, she's just a breath away from New York, and I know it's killing her to not be there, but she spends a good deal of time there. She lives in a house with some girlfriends, selling her artist magazine subscriptions, cockroaches creeping around, and dancing wherever she can get a gig. She wants to be out on her own, but it's safer, she says, in Montreal to have a partner. And so she stays connected with her dancing partner. Although he seems to drag her down a little, she blames him for a lot of the gigs they lose. But she's fiery. And the one thing I really connect with her about on this story is that she really nurtures that dream, that fire to get to New York and to dance there. And it's easy to let that get extinguished when you're scraping by and living in conditions that are less than desirable, and having to kind of convince others of your talent. Really, every job is an audition, but you can tell in her letters that she is just so ecstatic to be doing what she loves.
I'm going to jump in here. Rob, do you want to pull the picture up of her dancing? We've got the one of her with her partner, Dad, right? So we'll pull that up for a second. And then I'm going to take over for the second part of her journey. So Valerie makes it to New York. I believe she goes to Buffalo, and she meets this super wealthy guy named Lou Hatzfeld. And he is all over her, smitten and, wooing her. He has a family airplane. They have a massive estate in Connecticut. He's from a super connected family. This dude is like proposing to her a weekend. And in her letters home, she's actually making a joke of it. She's like, this guy keeps proposing to me and it's just not going to happen. However, he's got this connected family in New York. So there was something about him that she was kind of hanging on to. And in her letters home, she actually, at one point, he said he would fly her home for Christmas. And in her letter home, she said, he's offered to fly me home for Christmas, but where is he going to stay? So she was going to get a ride home in the family airplane and then ditch him at a hotel or something. So she kind of hung on to him. She stayed in this massive family estate. She was back and forth, still dancing in Montreal, and kind of knowing that this guy could be a bit of a ticket to her dreams. If she can sort of get connected to the right people. She was dancing with a dance company in New York, had her own place, had this guy that was kind of paving the road and showing her, the Waldorf Astoria and flying her over the city. And then Lou Hatzfeld gets wasted and smashes his car into a tree, and Valerie dies instantly, right? So that happened on January 2nd, 1937, and Valerie's gone, her dreams are gone, and his family basically just paid off our family, I believe, and shipped her body home, and that was kind of the end of the story. We have letters from her entire journey, which are charming and, give a sense of the era and her character and all her dreams. So it's a crazy story. And this guy, when we started, Lindsay and I actually took a trip to Saskatoon and started to retrace her steps. He not only killed Valerie, but he crashed a family plane in the Hudson River and killed somebody else. There was another automobile fatality with another girl. And there was another, yeah, bring up the picture of the dude, Lou Hatzfeld, and you'll just see him and be like, no. So crazy story. Lindsay's got one more letter we want to share. That was one of her last entries of her journey that really kind of highlights her passion and her drive and her bravery. You want to share that one, Linz?
Yeah, what one was that, Mel?
Oh, can I not send it to you? Okay, I'm gonna read that one. Sorry.
Plattsburgh, New York one?
Yeah, I didn't send that to you. Okay, so she says, where is that one here? I will find it. I'm sorry. I thought I sent it to you, Linz.
Maybe you texted it to me, did you? Here we go.
Yeah, I did. Okay, you got it.
I got it. Okay. Oh, okay. Lou still wants to marry me, but I want a career still. And I'm convinced more than ever that the two won't mix.
Or will mix, or won't mix.
Won't mix. I mean, seriously, she was proposed to so many times, this poor woman in Saskatoon and all the way along. I mean, she really tried to not get tied down. And she finds this incredibly interesting and dangerous fellow, but he's very persistent. So she says, maybe he thought that when I came to New York and saw how keen the competition was, I would get discouraged. But oh, little did he know that I left home with my eyes open. When I see a huge stage and see that little white spot hit the center of it, ready, waiting, and watch that magnificent orchestra rise from a black bottomless pit, I sit and tingle all over. I can see myself just fly across the stage, and the applause is simply deafening. Can't you hear it?
Thanks, Linz. So we wanted to share that family story. Lindsay and I have been obsessed with hearing about her and getting information. We started following it, and then obviously we had kids, so it's been harder to kind of pick up where we left off. And Lindsay is an accomplished actor in Vancouver. I am a sort of a writer, I'll call myself, but I think we've always felt this sort of creative tie to her and felt sort of a need to maybe finish her story or keep chasing her dream for her. And I think there's really a lot of power in these family stories. So thank you, Lindsay, for being a part of this. You know this story better than me. Lindsay's performed about Valerie's life in the past as well. So
right, I wrote a solo show about her. So yeah, definitely important to share these family stories. And thanks for having me. So nice to be here. Can't wait to hear about Vivian Maier.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna bring Jenny up right now and get into the Vivian Maier story. So Jenny Conway Fisher, director of the Glenbow Museum, she did our in-person tour in March and is excited to share the story once again. So I'm gonna bring her up and then I'm gonna join her at the end for some Q&As. And I'm gonna watch the Facebook feed while Jenny takes the stage. So go ahead, Jenny.
Hello, thanks Mel for having me. And you very graciously called me the director of Glenbow, but I'm not the director, I'm a director. I'm not in charge of the whole thing, just occasional things. So I'm the director of communications and marketing. And as Mel talked about, we had this exhibition that opened in February of Vivian Maier's photographs. And not very many people got to see it. So it's really fun to be able to dive back into Vivian and re-immerse myself in her story because she's fascinating. And as Mel said, she is someone who inspires obsession in others. So as you'll see from her story, many of you may have seen the film Finding Vivian Maier, which was released in 2013. It was Oscar nominated, and it basically shot her story to fame. And the world started paying attention. It was the work of a man named John Maloof, who was the one who discovered her. He was a real estate agent in Chicago and was looking for old photographs of neighborhoods in Chicago and was frequenting auctions, and ended up purchasing, sort of sight unseen, a box of her negatives from a storage unit this was in 2007. And her storage unit had been repossessed for lack of payment. And he bought this box and discovered this incredible treasure trove of undeveloped negatives. And when he started developing them, he realized that it was treasure and that this photographer was an incredible genius, an artist. And Maloof then went on this epic journey trying to figure out who Vivian Maier was. Her name was on certain pieces of paper. He ended up collecting more and more and more of her belongings that he searched sort of all over the state. She lived primarily in Chicago and also in New York. So he basically just sucked up all the Vivian stuff that he could find. And that was started in 2007. And for 2 years, he was basically trying to figure out who she was and learn more about her. He ended up, as a sort of interesting note, he tried Googling her in 2009 after no success for 2 years, finding out who she was. And he learned at that moment in 2009 that he found an obituary and she had died weeks before. It was like this moment in time that was just missed. And that's part of the story too. I think that's part of why she's so fascinating, is that there's all these, in a way, missed connections with trying to figure out who she was. And even still, her life is quite mysterious. The film, I'll tell you a little bit about her history before we get into the photographs. And her life has been unearthed gradually by following pieces and clues here and there. And people who have become obsessed with her have just chased down the tiniest of leads and found out all these interesting facts about her that were never known before. One of the interesting things about Vivian Maier's story is that because all of her work was discovered posthumously and she never had a say in how her work is presented, it does present an interesting quandary in terms of legal copyright. And that in itself has her life and her story and her photographs have sparked several legal cases over the years about who owns the copyright to Vivian Maier's work. John Maloof and one other collector are the primary holders of her negatives and photographs, and they have been printing them and selling them in art galleries, which is there's sort of questionable, well, you can question the ethics. They have claimed that they've done it in a way that is entirely ethical, and truly they have spent thousands of dollars of their own money to try and find out who she was and find her descendants. And then there was a quarrel. So they decided they found one of her one living descendant, which was a cousin in France. And the John Maloof camp found that person. And then another lawyer who wasn't connected at all, but just was fascinated by the case, took it on and found a different relative in France that was supposedly an even closer cousin. So those two camps were for several years, between 2013 and 2019, basically, were fighting over who had the rights to her estate. That has been settled. It was settled out of court, and now there are arrangements, and thus her work continues to be seen in public. So without those sort of agreements in place, we wouldn't see her work in galleries or in exhibitions or in museums. So thankfully, seems like everyone's pleased with the situation, and that's where that sits now. So to backtrack, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about her history because it's really interesting. As I did my research, I found out stuff that I didn't even know when we had the exhibition up several months ago. So I thought you'd be interested in hearing. If you haven't seen the film, I do recommend it. It's really interesting and it does spark an obsession. But I recommend watching it with a critical eye because it presents Vivian in a very romanticized way, but also in this sort of very male gazy way where she is, there's this underlying question, but why would a nanny take these photographs? Which I will examine later because that's a slightly problematic. So back to Vivian's history. She was born in 1926 in New York. Her family was originally from France. Her maternal grandmother had emigrated to New York in 1901, and she was followed later by her own daughter, Vivian's mother. Vivian's mother and father met in New York, and they did not have a happy marriage. Her father was an alcoholic, and her mother sounds like a very odd person. I think at best, she was very disinterested in other people. She was not connected with her family at all. And in 1920, Vivian had an elder brother who was born in 1920. And in 1925, when he was 5 years old, he was shipped off to live in a foster home. No reasons are known. He was eventually raised by his paternal grandparents, but grew up and had a really difficult time. He had issues with drug addiction. He joined the army, but he was dishonorably discharged. And ultimately, I believe in his 30s, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He checked himself into a sanatorium and was diagnosed. And he spent the rest of his life sort of in and out of mental health institutions and ended up dying in a care facility in his 50s. Back to Vivian. Woo, woo. It's like time travel. Sorry, trying to pack it all in. So Vivian's maternal grandmother seems to be the one constant figure in her life in terms of family. She took Vivian back to France when Vivian was 4 years old, and Vivian lived in France for 6 years until she was about 10. So in the film, they talk about how she had this very odd accent and it seemed to be put on, but it seems to me that if you grow up in France, you probably are going to have an accent. And so again, critically watching the film. So grandmother and mother did not get along. And when Vivian returned to New York, the grandmother brought her back. And so she was there as a 10-year-old. Throughout her sort of later childhood, she and her mother moved around a lot. Her mom was not really very mom-like. And Vivian spent some of her childhood with a foster family. And at some point, her mother just left. And Vivian was then put under the care of a woman named Emily Augmard, because she's French. And she actually seemed to be a positive figure in Vivian's life. There are photographs of them together on the beach being happy. So I think maybe she was a settled presence. So hopefully that was a more positive relationship. And an interesting note that in all the thousands of photographs and personal belongings and family albums that they found, because Vivian, I think, had gone back to France many times and knew about her family. She was just not interested in knowing her close family. So there are only 3 photos of the woman that is believed to be Vivian's mother. So obviously there was not much happiness there. Later, both the children were disinherited by their father when he died in the 60s. And Vivian's mother died alone in 1975 and made no mention of either of her children in her will. So it was obviously a very strange family life. Despite a very strange and rocky childhood, and the stories go to really describe Vivian as being very invisible to the grown-ups in her life. She was treated as being like wallpaper, someone mentioned. So despite that, in her 20s, as she became an adult, she actually entered into a period of thriving. And that's when they made the film, they didn't know that about her. So they very much focused on her life as a nanny and her later years where she was very poor. And that was part of the romance. But I think it's interesting to track back and find where she thrived. And that was in her 20s. Her grandmother actually died, but left Vivian an inheritance, which was when Vivian bought her first camera. And she went back to France. And in France, her ancestral home was bequeathed to her by an aunt. So she had some solidity, some financial backing, and she started taking photographs in earnest in France. It's one thing to note too, is that she actually knew, she was very interested in photography all her life, and I'll speak to that in a minute, but she returned to New York in 1951 with her sort of photography interest intact, her time, it was about 2 years in France, sort of practicing and getting her eye. And in 1952, she bought her very first Rolleiflex camera, and that was her camera that became her photographs that she took with that camera are the ones that she is most known for. The Rolleiflex is a dual lens camera, and it's like a box about that big, and you hold it down at your chest and you look down into the viewfinder, and I can't do it because I'm in the wrong spot, and it's a really interesting medium format camera. So it's not like a camera that you hold to your eye. You're taking your photos and the lens is happening at your stomach level. So that really informs the composition of a lot of Vivian's photographs. So there's sort of this interesting angle that emphasizes people's features, and it really adds to the drama of a lot of her images. So that camera obviously really suited her artistic sensibilities, and it allowed her to capture her vision of the world. This period was when she started nannying in New York, and that gave her the excuse. She would take the children out on these day-long treks through the city. Many of them in the film talk about how they just remember just the slog of walking and waiting as Vivian was constantly taking photos. And this allowed her to just be free in the world and move through the world, taking photos wherever she went. Everyone who remembers her and who knew her throughout her life just never saw her without a camera. So she always had it. And so from New York, she ultimately in 1956, she moved to Chicago, and she started working for a particular family with 3 young boys. And this family ended up being the core of her chosen family for the rest of her life. As the boys grew up and entered adulthood, she ended up, of course, the employment ended. But while she lived with them, she had access to a private suite. She had a dark room. She had a private bathroom, so she could develop her own photos. And that's when she really developed her own eye and her sense of her photography and what she wanted out of her photographs. And that was the one period in her life where she was consistently developing her negatives and printing her photographs, because she had control and she could do it herself. The rest of the photographs that she took throughout her life, most of them were never developed. The film just stayed in its canister. There was a period where in the later years, she tried going to commercial development companies, but she was never happy with it. And it always ended up being this very awkward exchange that the people at those businesses remembered her as being very odd and rude. And she gave fake names, and it was very secret. And I think partly it was because she was an odd person, but also because I think that she didn't have control and she wasn't happy with what they did. And so there's sort of always reasons behind things. And she's very much cast as this sort of outcast from society and possible mental health issues. But I think she was actually very much in her element most of the time and had all her wits about her. So that's one of the sort of myths that I've sort of like busting about Vivian. So she stopped developing her film and she started storing them more and more because she just couldn't stand the idea of someone else touching them or looking at them. I think she just didn't want, I think she felt it was an intrusion to have other people look at her work. She didn't want other people manhandling her negatives. So perhaps she felt like she might do it, she might develop them at some point, or perhaps she didn't care anymore. We'll never know, obviously. One thing to note here too is that Vivian traveled the world. So we know of trips to Canada in 1951 and 1955. She traveled across Canada, and we actually know that she came to Calgary. In 1957, she went to South America. In 1959, to Europe. She went to the Middle East. She traveled throughout Asia. In 1960, she went to Florida. And in 1965, she was in the Caribbean islands. So she loved travel. She loved the world. She loved people, even though she was very solitary and never had a family of her own or connected with people in an intimate way. She had close friends, but she never really revealed herself to many people. And yet she was fascinated by the world and always, always wanting to be in it and experiencing it and watching it. Ultimately, in the 1960s, she started experimenting with color film, and she used other cameras, more traditional to us, 37 millimeter cameras, which have a more rectangular format. But then you hold them up to your face and you can see her the images change and they shift, and she moves away from photographing people and they become more abstract. She started photographing found objects and newspapers and graffiti, and then in her life she started showing a compulsion for collecting things. She collected newspapers and magazines, and her collecting ultimately did become hoarding, and her apartment was full of stuff all the time, and she'd be very angry if anyone moved it or disturbed it. I like to think that she would have really been into true crime podcasts, because she was really obsessed with politics and sort of criminal behavior and current events, and she always had opinions about things like that. So starting in the 80s, as she aged, she had less work, less stability. She struggled, and into the 90s, she ended up putting all of her photography equipment and her negatives into storage. And that's where, of course, John Maloof found them. She was homeless in different periods. And ultimately, that original family in Chicago, the 3 boys that she raised, ended up supporting her in her old age into the 90s and early 2000s. And they supported her in a small studio apartment. And then she died in 2009. She slipped on the ice outside of her house and was in the hospital, and everyone thought she'd get better, but she just didn't. She drifted away. And then the irony of John Maloof looking for her for 2 years previous and never finding her until it was too late. So over her life, she amassed more than 2,000 rolls of film, more than 3,000 prints, and more than 120,000 negatives. And most of those she never showed to anyone. John Maloof, after he discovered them, he put them on a blog on the internet, and they went a little bit viral, and then that sort of fueled the film, and that fueled her fame, and that fueled us having this conversation. So as Mel said, Vivian Maier was obsessed. She was obsessed with photographs and taking them and being in the world, and then she somehow manages to inspire that in others. So I think with that note, I should show you some photographs so you can see what the whole business is about. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you what it is that we are talking about. Oh, come on. Come on, presentation. Oh, no. Aha, there we go. Sorry, everyone. So I'm just going to cycle through these and maybe speak to them, but also just kind of let you look. And if anybody has any questions about a particular photograph, I'll try and answer it, but I'll speak to sort of generalizations about her work as we go. She was self-taught, but we know that she was very knowledgeable about photography. She collected photographer monographs, which are basically artist books that photographers put out. You can see evidence of her experimentation and trying out different techniques, very much influenced by contemporary photography, and she was obviously following what was going on in the world. That early Rolleiflex camera used square negatives, so that's where the square size of her images comes from. And it influences the composition. You can see even when she moved to 37mm, more rectangular format, she still emphasizes the center of the image as the focal point. And you'll see that as we shift through. And Vivian was really, I think partly because she was a nanny, she was able to walk through the world with more invisibility. She was able to catch these moments of people having these strange interactions or unusual scenes, and no one seemed to notice that she was there or even care. I think partly that was because she was a woman, partly because she was sort of an unassuming woman. She dressed in sort of old-fashioned and plain ways. Although she did become very, I mean, for us, she seems very iconic because you see these photographs of her wearing this hat, but I think she just blended into the wallpaper in a lot of ways. And the children gave her an excuse to be out and be talking to people. And so that, I think, let her move through the world really easily. The Rolleiflex is interesting because the film, there are only 12 exposures on the film roll. So she had to be very judicious about what she was taking. You can't waste film when you only have 12 shots. And it's a huge operation to unpack the camera and put the film back in and load it. And so she was very careful to take her shots, to wait for the moment and then take the right one. You don't see her taking it. So many photographers take lots and lots of shots and then they edit and edit and edit and pull out the ones that are the perfect moment. Vivian didn't have the luxury of doing that. She had to capture the moment and that was it. And so much of the time she never even knew if she caught it because she never even developed the film. So there's part of that is it just because she was obsessed with taking the shot and catching the moment and just, it was almost like, you imagine her having this thrill of catching the moment and then the high goes away and she has to do it again? Or was it an incredible confidence in her own ability and knowing that she caught it and so she wasn't even worried about it? True crime, obviously, there's quite a few shots like this of nefarious goings on or people looking at interesting dramatic things happening. Lots of humor in her work, lots of really absurd kind of moments or strange textures that she captured. She took a lot of photos of men from behind and always in really sort of interesting, unusual and unexpected poses. One of Vivian's absolute, like her transcendental talent is in reflection. And you'll see that it plays out again and again. She just has this magic when she captures the reflection and she can tell a story in such an interesting layered way with her imagery and the lights and darks of the black and white film. This one I love. There are often little hidden elements that you wouldn't notice. If someone walking by, who would notice this man behind the curtain setting up the window for the shop before opening? The texture of the woman's hair, the netting that you can see. I don't know if you can see it, but like just the details of what she's capturing. And the fact that she's noticing, like, you know, that she's calculating the light and the dark and the texture and the focal point, the buildings behind that are out of focus. This one's incredible. I love this one. The light and dark, her ability to capture shadows and dramatic lighting. Again and again, she took photos of children in relaxed moments. And I don't know that she necessarily loved children, but I think she was interested in them. And I think she thought of them as people. She wasn't like other adults where she didn't treat them as equals. I think she was really fascinated by the life of a child, and because perhaps she'd had a strange childhood, but also like a child, she was sort of discounted. And you see that she was drawn to other people who were on the margins, women, people of color, people who were not part of the mainstream or who are outsiders, or there's moments of outsiderness, the loneliness that's palpable in a shot like this. And then every once in a while you'll see she's at the right place at the right time, and she catches like a celebrity in New York. And these shots, I think I have the contact sheet. I do. So this is the contact sheet from that moment. And obviously she just happened upon this, or maybe she went there on purpose to see them, Kirk Douglas, and I'm not sure who the actress is, but you can see she's fascinated by the crowd. She's fascinated by the celebrity and the glamour of the moment. And so there are definitely a sequence of events you can see here. Another reflection. Again, her shots that don't have people in them aren't necessarily as immediately captivating, but when you spend time with them, they sort of suck you in, and you see that she's playing with the reflections of the signs, but also what the signs say. She loved newspapers. I mean, the man in the photo is almost lost amongst all the newspapers. And I think she liked catching people unawares in sort of compromising moments sometimes. This one's an amazing one too. I can only imagine what they're fighting about. And everyone else is pretending not to notice. Or this one. You know he just wants to jump in the box. This one, I love this one because what is the conversation that's happening here? There is something really fascinating going on there, but it doesn't look fascinating to the untrained eye. And this one, these little intimate moments and quiet things that would go unnoticed by anyone else. Here's another celebrity, obviously. And you can see these ones are a little blurrier when she's like in paparazzi mode. She doesn't have the time to set up. She's like grabbing it as she can. And yet the expression on Audrey Hepburn's face is this moment of like in between people looking at her. She's not for the cameras at that moment. Vivian still managed, even though it's this sort of like shot off the cuff, she still managed to catch a moment of this person, this human being unaware. And the line of the women, I love this one, the shadows. This one's interesting too. This one's another one of her more formal kind of abstracted images of looking through, hiding a secret moment, something discarded. And there's another example of her really formal kind of play with light and dark and shadow and reflection and partial imagery. And that one, I love this one too. This glamorous, beautiful woman, and yet she looks so sad. So I asked, I had the pleasure of speaking to Calgary photographer George Weber, and I asked him to talk about what defines street photography. And he described it as it's a type of photography that captures the improbable. It captures chance moments, surreal encounters. It's all about luck. And the photographer, the street photographer, has the ability to size things up quickly, and they harvest a moment. And I thought that was a really interesting turn of phrase. It's like they're like incising their feel of the world and pulling it out. And George talked about how the composition of great street photographs, and that's sort of like what's in focus, what action is close to the camera, what surrounds it, the light and the dark, the negative and positive of the imagery. A street photographer really manages to just set things up to enhance the drama, or to just the angle is just whatever it is, it enhances the emotion of the moment. And George talked about it being a combination of intuition, observation, vigilance, time, patience, courage, and tenacity. And he talked about how street photographers are able to move through a space and witness a moment without being noticed, and they're more invisible. So obviously that's Vivian right there for you. The other thing which I thought was interesting technically, George talked about how street photographers often use camera lenses that reproduce how the human eye sees the world. And that does an enormous amount for letting the viewer feel like they are an immediate witness to the scene. So this is a little bit different than photojournalism, where the photographer is present and people know they're present, and there's more of an agenda. They're telling a very specific story or documenting a specific event. And then there's documentary photography, which also takes more of a narrative approach. It's usually characterized by a series or a sequence of imagery. And both those genres of photography are usually trying to remove the photographer's perspective or their personality or their bias. Not that it's always successful, but whereas street photography is very much about the photographer and their eye and their unique vision on the world. So exceptional street photography captures these emotional moments, and the image is this incredible alchemy of everything coming together in this satisfying manner. So it's the aesthetics and the emotional aspect and the storyline, and it all just comes together in this incredible single image that manages to grab people's eyeballs and just rip out your heart, the best ones. So Vivian basically was the essential street photographer, is what I'm trying to say. The other thing that was interesting about that George talked about was the idea of editing. And most photographers only reveal what they want to. They go through hundreds and thousands of images that they've taken and select the very best ones and present only those to their public. But Vivian never did that. And partly because she never had the opportunity, but also possibly because she never had the interest. So I think that's really interesting that we have this opportunity to see far more of what she ever would have revealed, obviously, but also we are robbed in a way of her own vision in terms of her picking the ones that she thought were the best. I had a quote there's a art critic for the New York Times named Roberta Smith, and she said, I thought this was a really good way of describing it: the variety of images suggests a consuming curiosity, the lack of prints, an almost unfathomable sureness in her own vision. Similarly, she rarely took more than one shot of a scene. So there's this incredible, like, almost superhuman confidence that she had that moment. She caught it. So what made her so good? I think she brought an outsider's eye to the world. She was in it, but she wasn't of it. She immersed herself in it and was fascinated by it, but she could move through it freely without sort of encumbrance of people or connections. She kept people at a distance, and she led a solitary and private life. And there are those that suggest this is a sad thing, but I think that was likely exactly how she wanted it. Vivian's photography was her way of placing herself in the world on her own terms, claiming her space and controlling the view. She was creating a sense of ownership and empowerment over the world because that was the only way she could do it. As a woman, as a sort of marginalized person moving to the world, her photography was how she exerted control. And she was constantly watching. She had a deep appreciation for people and their nuances and their tics and current events and what was happening and moments that would be meaningful. And she paid attention to what was going on around her. And then perhaps those are the qualities of a good nanny: vigilance and attention. I'm going to show you some of her portraits now. Yes, we are. I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to do portraits and then self-portraits. How are we doing for time? Oh, 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to whip through it. So let me just work through here. Portraits. The critic, Susan Sontag, said, "Every portrait is a self-portrait." And looking at Vivian's portraits, I think you can get a sense of her politics and her feelings on class and status. She was definitely drawn to those people on the margins, and the intimacy of her portraits is really compelling. I think that's why people are so captivated by them. She creates this connection, and often she's taking photographs secretly, and the people in the photograph don't even know they're being shot. And because of that waist level perspective of the camera, she's capturing these interesting angles that just no one else really was grabbing. In her best portraits, she manages to capture something beneath the surface. Photography is all surface when you think about it. It's just the veneer of what reality was at that moment. But a good photographer gives you a sense of what's underneath. It's this interesting combination of empathy and voyeurism, I think, with Vivian. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong thing. There. Okay, there we go. This one, I like these two characters. This little kid. I think this shot was from Canada. Actually, I think it's from somewhere in Ottawa. So she had this ruthless eye at times, but also a compassionate eye. You can see who she took care with and who she sort of empathized with, and then who she was really kind of exposing. There's a distinct sense of humor. Sometimes it's sympathetic, sometimes it's wry, sometimes it's sharp, sometimes it's more like parody. I like this one because this woman is obviously talking about something she does not want anyone to know about. And this lady. And then there's a portrait like this of this disfigured man who obviously wants to move through the world with invisibility, and Vivian won't let him. She spots him. And this man. I'm going to take you through some of her color work, and then we're going to go to portraits. This is some of these shots are really fun. These are portraits, and these are ones that are fun to like spot the Vivian. And she's almost entirely always recognizable because of her hat. She wore a hat in so many of her portraits. It's really interesting. And you can see with these ones, she's getting more abstract. She's playing a lot with reflection. Spot the Vivian. She's in there. Also, this play again with celebrity, you often see like there are enough celebrity photos and adjacent sort of paparazzi feeling photos that obviously there was an element of fascination there for her. And her color, you could see she's really interested in like super high contrast. I love this one too. And this one, oh, those kids. The days when you could leave your kids alone in the car to sleep while you went into shop. And they were so grouchy. This one's funny. It takes a minute. She often took photos of the lower half of people, which I think is really interesting. And this one I love too. Everyone's paying attention to something else except for that one little girl who spotted Vivian straight across. She knows what's going on. Same with this kid. This one's almost like a classical painting of like the. Here we are, self-portraits. Here we go. These are some of my favorites. I mean, there are so many self-portraits that are worth seeing. And the great thing about Vivian Maier's work is that you can Google her and all these images will come up. The ones that I've chosen to show you tonight were all in, I think almost all of them were in the exhibition. And so this is almost a tour through the exhibition. I didn't include everything, but that we'd be here all night. But these were the highlights. So actually, there you can see the Rolleiflex camera with its twin lenses and how you look down into the top of it to take the film. And those cameras are really interesting because it's backwards. So when you move left, your vision, like the scene moves right. So it's actually really mind bending to try to, like the skill it would take to actually focus and move it to where you wanted it to go. It would have to be second nature. This one I love because it's double. You can see her body down the bottom in the reflective sprinkler. And this one. Her sense of play, I think, is really interesting. And there's one of her kids. This kid I always think looks more engaged, like she's actually into it. This one I love. Young Vivian. And this one I like too. This is older Vivian, probably late 30s, maybe in her 40s. Like she wasn't trying to be seen in the world. Like she didn't wear clothes in a way that she was interested in style necessarily, maybe slightly, but not like for other people. But I like how she always tracked her own appearance and caught herself, and you see in her expression that she's having a good time. And this one I like too because either she had someone taking the photo or she set up a tripod. So who knows? But I like this one too because this is like her own vision of Vivian the photographer. Oh, that's not. Oh, there's the Rolleiflex. There you go. And that's it. That's what I got for you. I think the conceit of the original film that why would a nanny do this and and this idea that domestic work is incompatible with artistic ambition. I think that's interesting because Vivian, people seem shocked that Vivian didn't, that she was a genius, obviously, that she was very good at what she did, and she was an artist, and yet she didn't pursue attention. She didn't try to use her work for money or fame. She didn't try to make her way in the world with her photography. And we're meant to think that there's something odd about that there's something wrong about it. And I think it's so interesting how she challenges our comfortable ideas about how a person or an artist or a woman should behave in the world. And so I like to think that she lived the life that she wanted, even though it wasn't always easy and it got hard at the end. I think she was utterly devoted to her photography. And I think that she set everything up in her life very carefully so that she could pursue it. And photographer George Weber put it really well. Vivian chose freedom by not showing her work to anyone. She was utterly free from the opinions of other people. She could pursue whatever she wanted. She could be totally uncompromising. George talked about how, as an artist, it can actually be dangerous to get noticed because praise and success can lead artists to work to please their audiences. And rather than pursuing their own instincts or investigating their interests or having their special projects fulfilled, and the work can suffer. And I think Vivian was very conscious of that, possibly. And I think she just was utterly devoted to the work. So that's,
Do you want to bring me in? Can you bring me in too? And I'm going to do a quick wrap up. And then if we have some questions, we can field those after. Am I in? Yeah.
Oh, I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay. Hang on. Let's see.
Yeah, we can split screen, Jenny and I. So yeah, this was amazing. I feel full. This was a nice way to like step out of our life and just jump into somebody else's for an hour or two. And I think you kind of touched on something that I had kind of posted about in the Facebook group, where I think often women are labeled, right? Like you're a nanny, you're a spinster, you're an immigrant, you're whatever. And I think part of Vivian's MO was she left these boxes in an attic at the end of her life where it's like, surprise, I'm something totally different than what you labeled me as, right? Like there's labels people give us so they know what they should expect from us. They know who we are. So I think that was maybe part of my interpretation of her MO was like, I'm going to leave some surprises behind. And she seems kind of crafty like that. So I can appreciate that. And I love everything about her. I love the way you've told her story. I think she's so fascinating in every regard. So I think we're going to lose people pretty quickly. It's getting close to bedtime. So I have a couple kind of quick announcements. And then Jenny, I want you to kind of tell everybody what's happening at the museum right now. So I'm going to quickly say, thank you, campers. This is a free event. I'm going to pass on a donation to the Glenbow Museum. We have a donation button on our camp website in our store. So if you have enjoyed this presentation, you can throw us a few bucks and we'll make sure that we support the museum and their future. And anything you love and appreciate, we need to keep that around past COVID. So you can send us a donation. We're going to pass it on to those guys. Jenny will also share how you can donate with them directly. Camp, we have a winter driving event next week. I've just been sliding through every intersection, just like pumping the brakes, saying my prayers, hoping all of those things are going to work. So we've got Auto Sense for Gals taking the virtual stage next week. They're amazing. They did our car mechanics event last year. They are in their 60s, 70s. They're like mechanics, race car drivers. These women are badasses. So sign up for our winter driving event, donate to camp, buy some merch, do whatever you can to support us. And Jenny, tell us what's happening at the museum right now and all the protocols you guys have in place so we can come visit you guys.
Yeah, thanks. The museum is open on weekends. We are in the process of just, as of Sunday, we're closing down the 3rd and 4th floors for renovation. So some of the classic exhibitions that you may remember from your childhood are finally going away. So we can take a moment and say farewell. We've all grown up with them and have been incredible. But now we're making way for something new and renovating Glenbow. It's this weird time as we go through COVID, but I think it's actually really this incredible opportunity to build something that is designed for a real world as opposed to this imaginary notion of a formal museum that is very official. I think we're going to we always try to be really approachable and accessible and welcoming to everyone, but I think a new building will help us do that. So if you do feel like donating, we will happily accept it. We do have a donation page on our website. Another great way to donate, which actually you get out of beyond feeling warm and fuzzy, is getting a membership at Glenbow. That's a great way to participate in what's happening at the museum, and you get a newsletter and you get free admission throughout the year. We will be open for one more year. The 2nd floor will continue to have new exhibitions, and we're getting some incredible ones in the new year. I'm really excited about it. An artist named Shivanai Ashuna, she's Inuit, and she does these incredible large-scale drawings of like monsters and aliens and Inuit legends, and yeah, I can't even describe them accurately. It's going to be really cool, let me tell you. So that one's worth looking out for. We will be open throughout December, and it's just a nice warm spot to come and chill out. Our COVID protocols are really good. We've got it, everyone, the capacity is really low, so you can come in and feel like you've got the whole museum to yourself. And our admission is going down as of next week. It'll be down to $10 for everybody, and kids under 6 are free.
And you can park underground and go through, can you still go through plus 15s to get there? So it's a nice.
Yeah, most of the plus 15s are open in the convention center. Parking on weekends is way cheaper for sure. And the City Parkade and the Talis Convention Center Parkade are open. And there's lots of street parking right now because not a lot of people are coming downtown. But during the day, it feels fine. Like if people haven't been downtown for a while, it actually is more lively than it was at the darkest points. And we're all very friendly at Glenbow, so we love to see you.
Awesome. I want to thank you guys tonight. Thank you, campers, for tuning in. This was fun. I love these stories. I feel like I just want to dig for more of these amazing stories. They're, like I said, it's a nice way to kind of distract ourselves and step into somebody else's life for an hour or two. Thank you, Rob. Rob's always super into what we're doing too. I can tell he loved the presentation tonight. So it's always fun to have somebody that's on the team and appreciates the content. Thank you, Jenny, and your team from Glenbow Museum. We're happy to support you guys in any way, shape, or form. And thank you, cousin Lindsay. She's so amazing. I love her. It's breaking my heart that I can't hang out with her right now. So it was great to have her tell our family story. So thank you, campers. I will see you next week. Donate to camp, donate to the Glenbow Museum, buy your merch, and we'll see you at our winter driving event next week. Ciao.
Thank you.